Have you ever wanted to see a man rapidly fall asleep while recording a video because he's just so dang tired? Well, you're about to. Enjoy. Sometimes you've been moving for the last 2 weeks, you're in a new location, you have no idea how your microphone sounds, and you decide, you know what, let's do a tier list to piss everybody off. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my coverage of analysis of characters in turn-based strategy RPGs, oftentimes through the veil of a tier list, and you enjoy discussion about said turn-based strategy RPGs and the characters therein, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Oh boy, we are back again. I'm sorry everyone, it's been a little bit too long since my last video and my last stream. As I mentioned at the top of this video, Jane and I have been moving for the last couple of weeks, and we're finally getting properly set up. Everything's moved in, we're settled in. You can see new, very blank wall behind me. We're working on it, I'm getting it done. But I have my own studio now, which is really cool. So I wanted to get back into making videos. I have a big project that's coming up that I'm working on that has been taking a lot of my recording time, but I wanted to get something out there so that there's some content going up on the channel, and I've been meaning to cover this for a good long while. So apologies if there's a bit of echoiness, if my mic sounds different, figuring out new location stuff. But today we are analyzing and discussing every single playable character in Triangle Strategy. Now, if you didn't know, I personally consider Triangle Strategy to be one of the better turn-based strategy RPGs to be released ever. I know there are people who find that to be a contentious opinion, but I absolutely adore it. It's one of my favorites. I've spent a lot of time with it on the channel long before the channel blew up, so hey, go check out that Let's Play if you want. And now that a few years have passed and I've spent more time with the game on my own time, figure it only makes sense to ease back into content on the channel with a tier list of Triangle Strategy. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to go through every single playable character. I'm going to discuss what I like about them, why I think they're good, bad, middle of the road, what have you. And by the end, I think we're going to have a pretty comprehensive list of what I like and dislike. So settle in. We have a lot to discuss. Also, of course, if you are expecting any sort of normal channel stuff like supporter shoutouts or the Q&A, things like that. I know I've missed out on some of those kind of regularly scheduled things. I'm sorry. It's just the nature of moving into a new place and time just not being available. We're getting back to that now. So if you're watching this when it comes out, then we'll be getting back into the normal swing of things here. And thank you for being very understanding, very patient. I can't wait to get back to normal content creation. But with all that said, let's start discussing with our good boy Benedict here. Benedict is an easy S tier, no doubt. The just overall utility that Benedict brings to the table in the early game, buffing offense and defense, then giving extra actions, giving invulnerability with his ultimate. Benedict is always a character that I'm happy to include, and that's kind of the idea here, right? I'm ranking these characters based on how universal their inclusion is going to be. Because a lot of characters are very situational. They need very specific environmental effects. They need very specific team comps. They need to have some sort of overall reason to include until you get to characters like Benedict, who are pretty much good in any situation. So just the overall capability that Benedict brings to the table. He does okay damage. He's able to buff any type of characters, pretty much infinite situations where you're able to find a use for him. I think he's phenomenal, and so he belongs in S tier. Our very first S tier, which is nice. Frederica. Frederica is definitely A tier. She's not as universally useful as Benedict is, but she's an incredibly strong damage dealer. Through all of my runs of the game, through all of my different team comps, everything that I've kind of studied and analyzed, Frederica always comes out on top as one of the best damage dealers in the game, both in single target and in AoE. She can reduce the movement of enemies. She can deal big AoE damage. She actually has a very powerful charge spell. She can apply burning, which is really good for extra DPS. She herself gets bonus damage if she's in the sun or if she's standing in a fire tile. And all of these are very common occurrences, so it's very easy to set up a scenario for her wherein she can deal a lot of damage. Now that said, there's going to be times where she's not quite as adept. Sometimes it's just going to be too easy for her to get sniped because she is very squishy as a mage. Sometimes she's just not going to have the right setup to be able to deal her maximum damage, and that does bring her down a bit. She's not universally useful in every map, but any map that you can bring her on, more likely than not, she's going to be absolutely rolling face, and I love that about her. Roland. I feel weird about Roland, man. I think he's solidly C tier. The thing about Roland is he's a cavalier, right? If you're familiar with Fire Emblem, that's what he does. He's got high movement. He's got his spear. He's able to take opportunity attacks. He deals decent damage. The problem is that he's never quite good enough at what he's supposed to do to make him feel useful. He can't move as far as you might expect, given the fact that he has a horse. He doesn't deal as much damage as you might expect, given the opportunity attacks, the different bonus damages that he gets, and the fact that he's kind of fragile, so you would think he would deal more damage. He's not particularly tanky. Like, it's very rare that I feel good about using Roland. Now, that said, there's going to be opportunities for you to get in, deal a bunch of damage, get some backstabs, set up some kind of like bonus attacks, things like that. But even his Four Dragons ultimate ability kind of deals a kind of pathetic amount of damage, honestly. I've very rarely felt good about it. Like, there's been times, sure, where I've set up the perfect scenario where he deals maximum damage, but even then, for 4 points for an ability, I definitely feel like there's stronger out there. So Roland has never impressed, and given how many scenarios there are where you need to keep him alive, you need to protect him as the Crown Prince of Glenbrook, he just doesn't feel like he has the oomph that he really should. So I think he's going to sit solidly in C tier. Jila, I think, goes into B tier. She is very much the middle-of-the-road standard white mage healer, and that's something we're going to see a lot with triangle strategy characters. They are very clear homages to similar classes and jobs in Final Fantasy Tactics, right? Now, what's cool about Jila is she does have a little bit of time mage as well. She doesn't just do healing and resurrection. She can actually haste allies as well, and that is very useful. But a lot of the time what I found with Jila is that she's good, but using her, I'm kind of always on the back foot. Like, it's always nice to be able to heal. It's always nice to be able to haste an ally so they take actions faster or give them a re-raise. But she just winds up in situations a little too often where the healing that she's doing and the support that she's providing for the resources that it takes don't quite feel like it's efficient in a way. I don't mind taking her. There's been plenty of times where I've taken Jila and been perfectly happy with it, but I'm never really impressed. She's just there as a sort of equalizer for my enemy's damage. And especially on hard mode, a lot of the time she can't even keep up with enemy damage, which is part of the design of the game. But yeah, as far as support and healing, I think there are better options than Jila. She's not bad, though. Perfectly middle of the road. Anna is S tier. I love Anna so much. Anna's ability to get 2 attacks, to stealth, to backstab, to be able to throw around extra items, to put enemies to sleep. There's just so much versatility there, while also having pretty damn good damage output, especially if you have good positioning with flanking allies that you're getting bonus attacks in. Anna's really, really good. The number of missions that I've survived solely because Anna is such an absolute boss and is able to stealth, able to avoid attacks, able to pick out and very easily kill priority targets, it's really big. I don't know that there's any mission where I really relied on her that I would be able to get through as easily without her. She's just a pivotal part of any team that I build. I think she's an extremely strong character, and even though I don't normally go for the rogue type in RPGs, Anna is a welcome addition on my team at any point. Speaking of welcome additions on teams, Aridor. Aridor is also S tier, and I know we have a lot of S tiers early, but don't you worry. We will have lower tiers coming up. The thing about Aridor is the fact that he has decent damage output while being incredibly tanky before you even get to his ability to just provoke and draw aggro on essentially half the enemy army on any given map once you unlock his ultimate ability. The number of times where I've just been like, listen, I need to be able to stall for 1-2 turns. I need Aridor, and I need him to draw all of the aggro. Though that's a lot of the time the way that I cleared a lot of hard mode maps. And Aridor just makes it feel so much easier than it maybe should be. Like, Aridor is just... he's so awesome. The single target provoke, the AoE provoke, the ability to make himself invulnerable, the ability to like run up into the front line and take a bunch of hits normally just because he's physically tanky while also still dealing decent damage with his shield. Aridor is awesome, man. Like, Aridor, Anna, and Benedict are 3 starting characters that I was pretty much always happy to bring along. And I think I would be any time that I replay Triangle Strategy. They are just that good. Now, Huet. Huet is a very strong A tier, kind of like Frederica. The thing about Huet is, much like Roland, she doesn't deal quite the damage that I would expect her to. And of course, huge damage dealers in Triangle Strategy are a little few and far between, because the idea is more that like you want to set up chain attacks and you want to be able to use a character's utility to your advantage to overcome enemies as opposed to just raw strength, right? But as an airborne archer that has high damaging abilities like her Shooting Star ultimate, she never quite hit as hard as I wanted, which is really frustrating because, like, she's your ranged DPS, and she does fulfill that role. That is the role she's supposed to have. But there's times where she doesn't quite meet the quota that I would like. That said, she does still deal a very solid amount of damage. The mobility that she brings to the table with Flugy, being able to fly around on her hawk, is really second to none. And then the fact that she can blind and make it more likely that enemies are going to miss attacks and essentially completely negate damage from said enemies is really good. I really don't mind bringing Huet on most missions. If she can't get the advantage of height, or there's a bunch of enemy archers or things like that, I'll question it, but more often than not, she has been a very valuable ally. And I mean, not for nothing, but her and Anna together are the only reason that I was able to get the golden route on my first run through the game and deal with the insane second Avlora mission without using the fire traps. So she has a special place in my heart. It might even be bumping her up a rung, but I think overall she does do enough to warrant that A tier position. I just can't put her any higher. Now, Kentin. I think Kentin is solidly B tier. He's more of a support and utility mage compared to Frederica's more out-and-out damage, you know, with things like ice armor, being able to put down an ice wall to stall enemies, block paths, divert things, while still also being able to deal decent AoE and single target damage. The problem with Kentin is it's a little bit less likely that you're going to have ice tiles to work with, or anything along those lines, compared to something you can easily light on fire, or just having fire tiles that you can use to boost Frederica's damage. That said, Kentin is still quite strong. There's been a select few missions where using his AoE ice armor and being able to kind of block off certain paths on a map to divert enemies and delay them have been crucial, absolutely. But kind of like... well, Jila is not even really situational. She doesn't quite have the power that I would expect. But Kentin really is a lot more situational than Frederica ever will be. Even though I really like him, I think that causes him to be B tier. Now we have Rudolph. Rudolph, oh man, I really want to like Rudolph. I like the idea of a more close range, high damage archer character. I like the idea that he places traps and kind of deals in area control, that type of thing. But given his overall fragility and how hard it can be to lock down particular paths with single target traps, and then how finicky his targeting and accuracy can be, he's never quite performed for me the way that I would like. You know, of the two being between Kentin and Rudolph that you can get with that first route split in the game, I would always rather go for Kentin on my first run through. He just has more versatility, he has more utility. And while there are situations that Rudolph shines in, like pretty much any character in the game, it never quite feels like enough to justify bringing him, especially over other archer characters. So he's not out and out bad. That's where we're going to put our D tier characters for a lot of reasons that we'll discuss. But yeah, I've never really been impressed with Rudolph, unfortunately. Speaking of unfortunate, Serenoa. Serenoa, I think, is solidly C tier as well. This might get me some flack. But most missions, I wish that I could replace Serenoa. As the main character, as the Lord, you're not able to take him out of important story battles. I get that. But a lot of Sereno's kit just doesn't feel good. His Hawk Dive is strong. You know, absolutely being able to like jump down, back attack enemies, get bonus damage if you're at a higher elevation than them. That's great, especially for 2 points. Like, that's not a bad ability at all. The problem is that as a frontline fighter, especially on hard mode, Sereno doesn't really have the durability that I feel like he needs to feel safe on the front line without a lot of support. And then the skills that he gets as he levels tend to not be great. Like, his Spin Slash is an incredibly rarely used ability for me because it's so uncommon that there's going to be enough enemies around him to warrant doing that AoE attack, especially given the damage it does, when there's more likely than not going to be a particular target, like a squishy mage or a boss, that you would rather focus down using things like Hawk Dive. So Spinning Slash is pretty much never useful. And then his ultimate ability, where he has like the Banner of Wolfort and he gives everyone around him an extra ability point, you need to have so many allies around you to make that feel worth it. And even then, a single point is often not the deciding factor between being able to use an ability or not. So it feels like such a waste of a turn when you could be trying to deal more damage. If you were giving more points, of course, that would be insanely busted, because in ideal scenarios, you'd be getting like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 points for spending 4, which would be nuts. But given how powerful some other ultimate abilities are, like, you know, Benedict just making all allies around him able to take one attack without taking any damage, or Aridor becoming like completely invulnerable for multiple turns, or other such abilities, it just doesn't feel worth it. So there's arguments to be had for Sereno's damage output, don't get me wrong, but he feels very much like a one-trick pony when a lot of his abilities could and probably should be a bit stronger than they are. And I definitely would like to be able to replace him on a lot of missions. Now, Julio. Julio, I think, is a very solid A-tier character. Just his ability to pass on points and give buffs to characters makes him very strong. I don't think he's quite as capable as Benedict, and I think that a lot of people draw a lot of correlations between them, even though the buffs that they provide are definitely very different. But there's been a lot of times where I've had a big alpha strike that only worked because I was able to give extra AP to characters using Julio, because I relied on that damage output from him. He's a very, very solid support character who can still deal decent amounts of damage in melee. There's been times where I've absolutely needed to drop him to have a greater array of versatility in that character slot, but pretty much anytime I bring him to the table, I'm happy with him, so I think I'm pretty happy giving him an A slot. All right, Hasbara. I think Hasbara is solidly B tier. The thing that makes her weird is she's like a hybrid melee healer unit, right? But she's on a mount. So it's like she's a mounted D&D cleric. And that does give her some decent versatility. Her damage output is okay. Her healing, especially in an AoE around here, is actually pretty nice. She can throw allies around to be able to like reposition them, put them in more advantageous positions, or get them out of dangerous positions. But she kind of winds up in the same situation as Roland, where I guess because she has a mount, her overall stats are not great to balance that. So she doesn't hit quite as hard as I would like. Her healing is not quite as strong as I would like. And it's also more awkward because she just heals people directly adjacent to her rather than healing at range. And she doesn't really have an ultimate ability that stands out. Again, she just throws people around. And that's not bad. There's definitely times where you're going to want to be able to move someone out of harm's way or toss them into a range where they can like get some bonus attacks, whatever, or just even be in the fray. But she feels like a very like last character pick where you just kind of have a slot that you need to fill and you don't really know who to put there. She's not bad, but she's not my first pick ever either. Speaking of not being first picks, Narv I think is also solidly B tier. The interesting thing about Narv is that he's the red mage of the group, even though he clearly wears green. So he's a decent pick for pretty much all different types of magic. He can use fire, ice, lightning. He can heal. He's kind of the sage archetype. And as such, he's kind of a jack of all trades and a master of none. And at least when you're playing on hard mode and triangle strategy, a lot of the time you want a character to be extremely focused and capable in their job so that they can have maximum efficacy in that job when you really need to be able to eke out the absolute pinnacle of damage, healing, utility, etc. Now, there's been plenty of times where I have Narv on the team and I just really need him to be able to do some pickup healing, do some pickup damage, push some enemies around, and he's good at that. But a lot of the time you need more focus. So, as a not very focused character, I think he resides solidly in B tier, which I guess makes sense because, you know, it's very middle of the road, and that's pretty much where he falls. Jens. Oh boy, Jens. I think people are going to pick a fight with me for putting Jens in A tier, but especially on hard mode, there's been so many times where just using spring traps or using ladders or throwing nets has allowed me to kind of delay and maneuver the enemy around in a way that I needed to survive long enough with my other characters to actually dispatch the enemies that they're trying to deal with. Like the number of times where it's just been like, I'm going to gum up one walkway with traps forever, or I'm going to trick an enemy into trying to take this ladder down to my position, only to then block it so they can't get down. They move away. I move away. They move back to the ladder. I reblock the ladder. Like, it's a little bit gamey. It's a little bit AI manipulation, but that's what Jens is good at. He's very good at battlefield manipulation, and in triangle strategy in particular, where hard mode enemies can hit extremely hard, harder than you could ever hope to, having that ability to completely mitigate that damage because they're too busy trying to figure out how to get to you or getting interrupted on their way to you is hugely valuable. I can totally see how there would be people who wouldn't really resonate with the way that Jens plays, but if you take the time to really figure out how he can benefit your army, he does a lot for you. Now, as opposed to Jens, Lionel. I think Lionel is my first D tier character. It's a little bit of a shame, because Lionel actually does have some very unique capabilities with his taunt, his kind of tankiness, the fact that he can do other disruption techniques for the enemy. But at least on hard mode, it's so difficult sometimes to actually get those effects to trigger on enemies that when that's your primary game plan with a character, if you can't rely on it happening, it just makes them bad. You know, Lionel might be better on different difficulties where you can rely on things like his provoke, for example, landing more often. But on hard mode, where it's kind of like a 50-50 toss-up, and then you're not also like dealing really strong damage or having some other type of utility, it makes it hard to justify picking you. So Lionel has always been my least used character. He's always been the lowest level out of my party, and I really don't ever see that changing, unfortunately. As much as I like his character and I like his playstyle, it's just, it's hard to make use of. Now, also down in D tier, we have Piccoletta. Piccoletta is another kind of weird, quirky character where the whole idea is you want to be able to use her decoy to get extra bonus attacks or throw extra items around. And then you also want to be able to throw items around with her to get bonus range, area of effect, etc. She is very much the item, or at least offensive item character. And that's interesting, but the problem is, again, on hard mode, money is tight, and damage from throwable items is not great. Like, it's nice to be able to pick up some extra little chip damage here and there, but to have a whole character based around it when you need to be able to buy the resources for her to use, that's rough. Now, that said, you don't necessarily need to use those abilities with Piccoletta, but if you don't, the most that you can really hope for is getting some extra bonus damage in through sync attacks with your like decoy, and then hoping that enemies kill it and then take detonation damage from it, which is very hit or miss, and even then the damage isn't great. Like, if anything standing next to it immediately got just absolutely obliterated with like 80% of their max HP, then fair enough, it'd be something to work with, but more often than not, it's just not great damage output for something that requires a lot of setup and luck. Now, someone who is absolutely phenomenal, we have Medina. Medina is easily S tier. Chemists in Final Fantasy Tactics are already S tier, and Medina is basically just that, even down to her outfit. But what's nice is that she's actually able to take more advantage of the effects of items due to the more expanded sort of repertoire of items in Triangle Strategy. Combine that with the fact that her ultimate ability is going to heal everyone on the board and then also give them extra action points. It makes you ask, like, why am I even using Sano right now? Sano gives extra action points in a small area around him, whereas Medina hits every ally on the board while also healing them in the process. The number of times that I've used Medina just for setup to be able to get my other abilities online for other characters is huge, and I certainly expect her to be one of my most used and most played characters every single time I play Triangle Strategy going forward. She's gross, I love her, she's absolutely phenomenal, and she is unquestionably S tier. Now, Asana, I think Asana is solidly B tier, no matter how attractive she is. The thing about Asana is she really wants to have geo effects to work with, like, you know, water on the ground for her to electrocute. Her abilities revolve around, like, electrocuting enemies, putting water on the ground, making it more understandable to try to go for that type of strategy. The problem is it requires a lot of setup, and the payoff is very often not worth it. Due to the way that water tiles spread, even if you use Asana's ability to bring in rain clouds to make it easier for her to shock stuff, you typically only have one really good turn where you can try and drop a big lightning bolt on something and get extra bonus damage and stuns. Beyond that, she's kind of just a mediocre single target damage dealer, and while she can enable certain other strats like using, say, our later mentioned Geomancer character to get extra effects from the terrain tiles that Asana creates, it's a lot of effort for not a lot of payoff. And so while the damage is good and the stuns are nice, she's not as universally capable as someone like Frederica. Now, Archibald. Archibald is a very interesting archer character because obviously he has very low move range, but his damage output is extremely strong, and his ability to just single out priority targets and chunk them to death is second to none. Like, I would almost be tempted to put him higher than Huet. However, I think Archibald's low move range definitely drags him down, unfortunately. But if you're looking for a very strong single target damage dealer with arrows, you really can't go wrong with Archibald. He will serve you extremely well. Cordelia is also A tier. If Jila is kind of the standard middle-of-the-road white mage, then Cordelia is the upgrade, right? She just seems to perform better in pretty much every capacity in terms of healing than Jila ever can hope to. And maybe that's partially because Jila has a little bit of time mage going on. But if you want to res stuff, heal stuff, support allies, Cordelia is your girl. Now, of course, you're not always going to have her. It depends on what route you pick as opposed to Jila, who you will always have available to you. But if you have both characters, Cordelia is definitely a step above Jila, and I'm more than happy to put her in A tier as a result. Now, Travis. I think Travis is C tier. He's certainly not bad. His ability to move enemies around, deal damage to them, kind of be that chunky frontliner that gets in there and causes havoc for the enemy is not bad. But I feel like his moveset almost serves him better on the enemy team when he has more stats to go around. His HP and everything are inflated due to being, you know, an enemy. I think that serves him better. I really am always scared of fighting Travis in the campaign, but whenever I get him, I'm not super impressed, so I think he really doesn't belong any higher than C tier. Now, Trish. Trish, I think, gets the benefit of being an archer and having decent damage output, so it's definitely easier to slot her into a team that might not have an otherwise dedicated slot for a tankier unit like her father. That said, the other archers that I've been able to use in the game definitely feel like they've been more capable than Trish is, certainly more accurate. And so while she does have certain options available to her that make her a potentially valuable choice in niche scenarios, I don't think she ever really reaches beyond B tier to the same heights as some of these other godly style archers. Now, Milo. I think Milo is a very solid A tier character. She's weird because she brings a lot of versatility to the table, especially with her mobility, and then the ability to charm and poison enemies and deal decent magical damage in the as a result is really nice. But at the same time, I've never really felt like she's doing enough to earn an S tier slot. I've used her a lot. I've had a lot of missions go right because of her disruption and her poisoning and being a distraction for the enemy. But overall, I don't think she quite has the punch that she needs to get into S tier. She's good, don't get me wrong. I highly recommend the character. I don't think there's anything wrong with using her. But she's providing support for the big guns. She herself is not the big guns, if that makes sense. Now, Maxwell. Maxwell is definitely an S tier character. If you want to talk about big guns, especially big damage, Maxwell is your man. His star-crossed ultimate ability where he deals damage in a big plus formation. Very, very solid options. If you're looking for an infantry spear user that you can rely on to deal a lot of damage, Maxwell is your guy for sure. I've always been happy whenever I've been able to get access to him. I've always been happy with his performance. There's really not a lot more that I can say other than just Maxwell deals a ton of damage, and I'm always happy to have that on my team, even if he shows up late. Now, Flanigan. Flanigan, I think is a solid B tier. I like that Flanigan can really make himself a problem for the enemy, and I like that similarly to Huet, he has a bird so he can fly around and really put himself in a position to become the target for the enemy. But he doesn't have as much damage mitigation as some other tanks do. And then he also has a little bit more, I would say, vulnerability and lack of damage. He can still slap and he can still take hits, but there's more that's going to affect him negatively and really deal a lot of damage to him than there would be if it was just like some random schmuck on the field, right? So I can't really put him higher than A, but there is a lot of survivability techniques that he brings to the table that are not very common, which I enjoy. Groma, I think, is solidly C tier. As your designated evade tank, Groma is in a really awkward spot where enemies generally don't have low enough accuracy to miss every attack on you. Sometimes it happens, and that's great, but you're really rolling the dice here with Groma and hoping that she's able to dodge the attacks that you need her to dodge, not only so that she doesn't die, but so that she gets the benefits of her other special abilities. But when she dies, it's not great. You need to be able to dodge, you need to be able to rely on getting out of the way of enemy attacks, and we are taunting enemies as well. If you're not able to stack enough evade to dodge all of those attacks, Groma will fall insanely quickly, and that just hurts every time it happens. So I've never been impressed with her. I really wanted to use her, but I think Groma is solidly C tier. Now, Avlora is an easy S tier, I would say. But as far as Avlora's outright damage output is concerned, I mean, she is absolutely disgusting, right? Her Bloody Cross ability does massive amounts of damage before you even consider the fact that it knocks enemies back so that they potentially take collision damage. She gets more damage as her HP gets lower. She's able to drain her HP to deal more damage with single target attacks, which then, of course, makes her single target attacks stronger. Avlora is absolutely awesome. She is the Dark Knight archetype in Triangle Strategy. I'm always happy to use her on every team that I have her available for. I think you should absolutely be using her if you have not tried already. Decimus. I think Decimus is very solidly B tier. The thing about Decimus is he's a calculator from FFT, but balanced. So it's much less likely that you're going to be able to use his abilities on everyone, partially because of just the math requirements of using his abilities. Secondly, because of the actual points that are required to use said abilities. And then third, because they have a limited range, unlike the map-wide range of calculators in FFT. That said, Decimus does bring some really nasty effects to the table, so if you can make him work, he helps a lot. And I can only hope that when we eventually get the Final Fantasy Tactics remaster, remake, whatever that might be, we will see something like the Decimus effect for calculators in that title to make them a little bit more fun and engaging to use without solely being disgustingly busted. Our last two here, we have Giovanna. Giovanna is solidly D tier, and it's exclusively because of how situational she is. Sorry, I have an itch in my eye here. The thing about Giovanna is she, unsurprisingly, is your Geomancer equivalent for Triangle Strategy. And that means she needs to be standing on particular types of terrain to be able to use her attacks. However, all of her attacks are very linear in their targeting, and while they can deal decent damage, they never really feel like they're the most powerful things around, even if they do have really strong abilities. Combine that with the fact that you actually need to be standing on a particular tile to use it, and more often than not, you're just going to be throwing rocks at enemies with her stone throw ability, which is definitely not the best use of a character. In a team or a sort of environmental scenario where you actually have the options you need to be able to use her abilities, she can be really good, but it's a very situational setup, and as such, I have to rate her pretty lowly. Finally, Quahog, Quahog, whatever you want to describe him as. This is our resident time mage for the group. And what's cool is he's actually able to use that time magic to heal and support, as well as disrupt and buff allies. For example, he has the ability to move an ally back, or I think an enemy as well, to a location that they were in the previous turn, with their HP and ability points reset to that turn as well. For example, the number of times where I've had a character run up and just be like, alright, I need to be able to deal a bunch of damage here. I'm going to get clapped back really hard, but it's like, say, Avlora, right? I need to run her into the enemy formation. She won't die, even if she takes a bunch of hits. She'll pop a big bloody cross, deal a bunch of damage, and then next turn I'm going to figure out how to extract her. Well, that's where Quahog comes in. He comes in, uses his basic ability on her. She warps back to the position that she was in, which is likely out of range of the enemy, and has the HP that she had at the start of her turn, which is just insanely strong. I don't have a lot else that I can say about Quahog, really. He just is really strong for his time manipulation abilities, especially like giving you other character moves. But at the end of the day, like, his power is very much reliant on the power of the party that you bring to the table. So it fluctuates, but I think just the raw capability that he has leaves him in A tier. And with that, my friends, this has been the Triangle Strategy tier list. I feel really good about this one. Like, I went off on a couple of tangents there. I lost my train of thought a couple of times, but as far as how I feel about a lot of these characters, I think it's a very appropriate list. Now, of course, there's some characters on here that I used way more than I probably should have, given the tier list, such as like Flanigan and his Armored Bird, and Kentin for his ice magic abilities, but overall, it's very, very solid. And I'm curious to see what you guys think. So let me know down in the comments below if you have already seen Triangle Strategy and want to talk about what the characters do and how you kind of feel they rank compared to where I ranked them. Or if you haven't played it before, but you kind of know about the characters from reading about it online, you can let me know what your thoughts are of this tier list based on that as well. That said, I'm going to wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.